of the Coast Salish, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and Ani-shi-naabe, Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakoda, Tsuu T'ina, Dene territory, and Mississaugas of the Credit, ho-de-no-sho-nee, and Huron-wendat territory. We're honored to have team members and attendees joining from other territories across North America. So again, welcome. My name is Ashley Snape, and I am the head of People and Culture at Thrive. Please note that you may ask questions throughout the webinar, and we will address them accordingly during or near the end. This session is being recorded and live streamed on LinkedIn. For those interested, the recording will be available online afterwards. Without further ado, I'm excited to introduce our speakers. Cheyanne D'Souza is a registered psychotherapist qualifying at Integra Health, who is an individual and couples therapist who utilizes a person-centered approach to provide warm and empathetic counseling services. John Helliwell is a professor emeritus of economics at the University of British Columbia, co-founder of World Happiness Day and co-editor of the World Happiness Report. Dr. Lara Aknin is a distinguished professor of psychology at Simon Fraser University, a former fellow with the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, chair of the Lancet's COVID-19 Mental Health Task Force, and a co-editor of the World Happiness Report. All right, so let's jump in. What is happiness and how does it differ through the lens of biology, psychology, and philosophy? I'll pass this over to Cheyanne first.
Sorry, just needed to unmute myself. So happiness is an emotion. It is a complex emotion caused by internal and external factors. From a biological perspective, our hormones create happiness. So hormones are chemicals produced in our body that are carried through our bloodstream. They act as messengers by regulating everything from our physical function to our emotional well-being. Hormones have significant influence over our thoughts, emotional regulation. Thus, by understanding how they work, we can create specific strategies to trigger hormones that contribute towards emotions such as happiness. Looking at our 4 happy hormones. If 4 hormones that contribute directly to our happiness include dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins. Dopamine is a hormone and a neurotransmitter that is our primary driver of the brain's reward system. It's produced when we experience something pleasurable. So things that trigger dopamine include listening to upbeat music, eating something sweet, getting a good night's sleep, or even completing a small task. Serotonin is a hormone and neurotransmitter that helps regulate mood, sleep, appetite, digestion, learning ability, and memory. Serotonin plays a significant role in reducing feelings of anxiety and depression. Things that stimulate serotonin is going out and getting some sunshine, going for a walk, doing cardio, or practicing meditation. And then we have oxytocin. This is also known as our love hormone. Its role is informed in attachment and bonding relationships, and it can promote feelings of trust and empathy. To stimulate oxytocin, you could sleep beside someone you love, give someone a hug, pet a dog or cat, cook for someone you love, or even hold hands. If you are like me and you are single, a simple putting your hand on your chest can help also release oxytocin. And then lastly, of our happy hormones, we have endorphins. This hormone is the body's natural pain reliever, and it is produced in response to stress by minimizing discomfort and maximizing pleasure. To release endorphins, we can exercise, burn essential oils, eating dark chocolate, or even watching something funny. So from a biological perspective, to trigger happiness, we need to be working on how to trigger our happy hormones.
Thanks, Cheyanne. Lara, could you provide a psychology lens for us?
Sure. So from a psychological perspective, happiness is kind of a term that we use to express a more refined or broader psychological concept of what we call subjective well-being, which is this umbrella term that captures both how you are feeling in your life right now and how you assess your life overall. So it's considered to have 3 parts as part of a tripart model. The first of these legs is your positive affect, so your positive feelings driven in this moment primarily, or in your short-term experience. So this can be triggered by short-term and long-term thoughts or things like eating chocolate or experiencing a positive situation with other people. The second leg is negative affect, which is we would predict that subjective well-being includes low levels of negative affect, so not experiencing any physical pain or negative feelings in the moment. And the third component of this subjective well-being model is your life evaluation. So this is how you view your life as a whole. And oftentimes we think about subjective well-being as kind of the coalescence or component, these three components working together. So high levels of positive affect, low levels of negative affect, and a positive perception of your life as a whole. An important criteria for subjective well-being, of course, is that it's a subjective experience. And so it's not something we necessarily triangulate from the outside world to understand how someone might be feeling, but it's reported by the person themselves and how they're experiencing it. Positive and negative affect tend to fluctuate on a more daily basis, whereas these cognitive evaluations of your life as a whole tend to be more stable over time. Now, they certainly can change and they do respond to major life events, but from day to day, people's cognitive evaluation of their life is not bouncing around. It's more these momentary positive and negative affect states.
And John, I'll pass it over to you for a philosophical lens. Oh, you're muted, John.
Being muted is probably the best way of proceeding. When I did my first paper on this, I appointed myself Aristotle's research assistant, so I obviously have to fill in the philosophical background. For Aristotle, eudaimonia, which was his umbrella measure for happiness, he had a lot of things supported it, and they include precisely the things that have already been mentioned. And but what's missing a little bit is so far is the idea of living a good life, in a sense of a life that is generating goodness for others. And virtue, in other words, a virtuous life is central to the Aristotelian notion of happiness. And it appeared in the other lists, but not with at a headline level. And I think, and I know Lara's research in particular has dealt with this, but it's absolutely fundamental to happiness. And it doesn't come into these individual focused approaches typically, which is for you and your environment. It's not that. The really important and deep thing is that true happiness in the Aristotelian sense is produced by connections, and by connections with others, for others, and both those elements are fundamental. And Aristotle had great wisdom, and as I interpret much of the modern research, it's just that. It's that unlocking possibilities for people to do things together for others is not only something that sustains your happiness, but it's even good in the process of dealing with people who start with unhappiness.
Thank you, John. So how are unhealthy habits triggering our happy hormones in a fast-paced digital society? I'll pass this over to Cheyanne.
So living in such a fast-paced digital society is both great and terrible for our mental health. On the one hand, it makes it easier to manage our lifestyle habits, get social support, connect with friends from all over the world, and have endless access to information and entertainment. But on the other hand, the habits we form around using technology with things like social media or even TV, apps like Netflix and Prime that automatically just go to the next episode. We don't really get a break from that. Even things like TikTok and Instagram, to be scrolling through, it's easy to sit and mindlessly scroll through for hours. From a neurophysiological perspective, sitting on social media is led to an increase in stress hormones because it suppresses melatonin, the hormone that helps us sleep. And more often than not, when we are scrolling through things like social media or watching TV, we're in a sedentary position, which suppresses three of our happy hormones: serotonin, dopamine, and endorphins. We're not getting that movement and exercise we need, which directly relate to our happiness. Even going through and seeing things like living or now being on social media, it's really easy to edit photos. Constantly seeing images of what perfect bodies should look like it can increase or affect our self-esteem and self-confidence, because we can't live up to these images we're constantly seeing online, constantly taught that this is normal. So it definitely does impact our happy hormones, just because we are spending so much time on social media and not actively thinking about how it's impacting us.
So can you implement a healthy form of happiness through digital technology? Maybe we'll pass this to John first and to Lara.
Yes. I think that the thing about digital technology, using it as a broad description, is it gives you a reach that is otherwise inconceivable. So that if there's a good message and you know how to distribute it, its capacity for changing the world is phenomenal. And there's a specific example right out of the COVID years. One of the things that's been very surprising in the latest World Happiness Report is the extent to which life evaluations in the 3 COVID years across the world were essentially the same as in the 3 previous years. How could that be? Especially if social media are a bad thing, and then you rely only on social media, how can this not be destructive? If happiness is built on social connections and you've lost all these social connections, how could you possibly be maintaining your well-being? And the answer is, going back to what I was saying earlier, is that it has permitted people to reopen and construct new channels of communication and support that they had not realized before. And as we often find from crises, that having the chance to reach out and help others and doing it, in fact, you learn 2 things. One, that you actually makes you happy to be helping others. Much more importantly, you see your neighbors and others reaching out to help still others. And that gives you a lot more faith in the support that's available to you and to everybody in the society to which you live. And that's a fundamental support for happiness, is to believe correctly that you live in a society that will support you. Well, digital technologies provide all of that. And it's particularly the kind of things like Thrive that open up the possibilities for people to co-create their health at the same time as establishing connections with others, right? You can think of networks among people who have the same condition and sharing secrets on the side, as it were, on the chat bar, while at the same time, you're getting more face-to-face contacts in this digital way in which we're connecting with one another, previously couldn't have done, in order to build a community that, in fact, because there's 60 years now of research that says if you get direct connection with people, even face-to-face on screen and discussing on screen, you trust them much more. When you trust them much more, you're more able and willing to develop cooperative solutions to your problems. Well, that's, of course, what healthcare is all about and should be about, is people who come in with different things. Some of them may be problems, but Thrive permits people to get connected with each other and with the providers of repair mechanisms in order to avoid repair mechanisms by sharing practices and lessons that will keep them healthy and make them positively healthy in the first place. To me, that's the biggest gain. They're the narrower ones that you can get much more efficient management of the healthcare system through these digital technologies, faster sharing of information among trusted links. And I think that's as it were ticked off as a box. This use of this network in order to create the positives is a whole set of new potentials that needs work and needs a broadening of understanding, which I think this webinar is intended to start.
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of what John says. I think of social media and technology as a very powerful tool that can amplify both the positive and the negative that's presented in front of it, or it's intended or pointed towards. And as John referenced earlier, and I didn't speak to in my first question, but there's a large body of research from psychology and, in fact, many of the social sciences underscoring how important social connections are and how important pro-social behavior is for our own well-being, not just for the recipients, but how good doing kind things can make us as the actors feel. In fact, we have one chapter in this year's World Happiness Report dedicated dedicated to kind of summarizing this evidence very thoughtfully for a general reader. It shows that not only do recipients benefit, but the actor benefits, and even people in the nearby vicinity or community stand to benefit from observing or participating in kind acts. And I think social media and technology has the ability to amplify these possibilities, to invite more people into opportunities for helping other people, to broadcast these opportunities, to share the outcome of these opportunities, and to be recipients of these opportunities. And I think that's a very powerful megaphone, if you will. But on the flip side, I think there's also a bunch of evidence showing that just how simply having social media can distract us from these very same instances as well. There's a lab at UBC that has documented, for instance, just simply having your smartphone with you when you're out for social events leads you to not pay attention to the person you're sitting with across the table. And so it can circumvent the exact same social connections that it is meant to serve and protect. And so I think it's a powerful tool and one that we need to be mindful of.
Thanks, Lara. How can measuring and tracking your happiness enable better mental care? And I'd love all of your perspectives on this, and maybe we'll do a roundtable and start with Cheyanne.
Yeah, measuring and tracking your happiness is good for your mental health because it makes you just aware of your emotions. Similarly, so like think, how often do you check in with yourself during the day? Check in with how you're feeling, what's kind of going on with you internally. Living in such a fast-paced society, it's difficult to kind of not be distracted by everything going around us. Things like checking in with how we're feeling, how we're doing, even just checking in with, hey, when was the last time I ate something? Or did I get a good night's sleep? We often don't tend to do these things. So what I often do with myself, and I do recommend to my clients, is check in with your emotions. Check in with what you're feeling every now and then. Be aware of how often you're experiencing things like anger and sadness and fear and anxiety. Similarly, like how you're being aware of how often you're experiencing things like happiness. If you find that if you do start to track your emotions and you find that you aren't feeling happy as frequently as you would like to, and you are getting a lot of those other negative emotions coming in, that's when you can kind of be like, okay, how can I alter my behavior now? To how can I alter what I'm doing? How can I alter my habits to increase these positive emotions?
I'll go over to you, Lara.
Sure. I agree. I think tracking your happiness in various emotional states and needs can be really helpful. At a personal level, I think it's really important to be aware. Sometimes we can be absent-minded or distracted or caught up, sometimes through technology or otherwise, with the events of our life, and not be so mindful of how it is we're feeling. And these regular check-ins can draw our attention to how we're feeling. And if we feel unsupported or just we're experiencing a range of stress or anxiety, drawing attention to this might help us kind of seek out proactive supports. Also, it can be really helpful to try to understand some of the forces that might shape our daily mood and behavior. So for instance, if we realize that we're particularly stressed on days that we see a certain family member, or we have to participate in certain life activities, it can be mindful to and helpful to know how we can try to support ourselves or other people in our lives. But beyond the individual tracking, I think there's a lot of value in measuring happiness and emotions at a broader level. John might want to speak to this, but there's been a large campaign recently to measure what it is we treasure. So the things that we bother measuring every day and keeping track of, or maybe not every day on a national level, reflect the priorities and what we care about. And so for a long time, well-being levels were not truly assessed by governments or by organizations or by universities or by companies, because we kind of just assume that people will take care of themselves. But if we are measuring how people are doing, it reflects that this is a priority and something that it is we care about.
I like both of those responses. Let me put something in the middle there. If we're thinking from your individual perspective, the most important thing is perhaps beyond tracking your own happiness, but tracking the happiness of those with whom you are interacting on a regular moment-to-moment basis, day-to-day. Look those people in the eye, look the situation in the face and say, what is going on here? How am I connecting with these people? Am I doing it in a way that's good for them? And am I learning about their problems and so on? So the tracking of the happiness of others, not just it's important, not just broadly at the overall society and group level, but in your own personal level, just as to think pro-socially makes you happy, to assess the effects you're having on others regularly, immediately, and carefully is going to be an important way of improving the happiness of all. And that has implications for everything, of course.
Thanks, John. We've had a couple questions come in throughout the webinar from our audience, so I'd just like to take a minute and answer some of those questions. The first question might be better fit for Cheyanne. So how can you get into the habit of tracking your mental health concerns, and what are concrete steps that need to be taken?
So tracking your mental health concerns could simply be, and again, everyone likes to track it differently. Some people prefer journaling where they can write out their thoughts and feelings a day. I personally am not a journal person, so I actually have a little chart in my room, and I just track it with a number. So I identify the emotion I'm feeling, and then on a scale of 1 to 10, I track the intensity of that emotion. And kind of going back to what Lara said, reflecting back and looking what is contributing to that. So usually on Thursdays are kind of where I hit my emotional peak for the week. And it oftentimes leaves me feeling stressed and angry, and I'm finding it very difficult to regulate. And then I got to think back, like, okay, why am I feeling this way? Well, I didn't get that great night of sleep. If I haven't eaten anything, or if just any stressors have been contributing to my life. So kind of using that constant reflection. And again, it could be just mentally checking in, being like, hey, what's going on? It could be writing it down. It could be writing it on your phone, kind of finding what works for you. Some people also like to process externally, so they need to talk about what they're feeling in order to process it. So it could also be calling a good friend and going for coffee, or meeting with a therapist, or even just talking to a parent or a coworker about what's been going on, getting those human connections in to help you process how you're feeling, and feeling connected with others can increase those positive feelings.
If I can add to that, please, Ashley. I really like Cheyanne's suggestions there. And one assignment I do with students in my class is actually a happiness journal exercise in my third year class, where for the span of a week or 10 days, I ask them every day to rate their daily happiness. Although you could pick various emotions, I'm primarily interested in happiness in this class on happiness. And the class as a whole nominates up to 10 variables or 10 constructs that they think might shape their daily happiness. And so each individual for 10 days tracks their happiness and each of these variables. Then at the end, they run simple correlations to try to see to what extent their happiness is associated with each of these things. And some of them are kind of the predictable outcomes, like sleep, quality of food intake and water intake, some of the more biological processes, but others refer to the level of quality social time that they get, the amount of time they spend on social media. It's been really interesting to see the list generated by the class. And it's a very valuable exercise. And I remember doing this as a grad student myself, because we often have intuitions about what it is that shapes our happiness. And some of those are accurate and some of those are not. I often find that my students are quite surprised by the data that they see. I mean, it's only 10 days. They could certainly continue this exercise, and some of them do over the course of a whole semester. But it's been really helpful for them to not only mindfully reflect on their own daily happiness, as we just talked about, but also to collect some of their own personalized individual data to look at what factors are shaping their daily happiness.
I could add a moment on it too, if you'd like, because it's very appealing to know how you should be aware of what's going on in your life and the life of those around you, and what to do about it. There's a group that's now got millions of members all over the world called Action for Happiness. And they have not only calendars that they give, and then you can get these tips and recording possibilities day by day, but they've got this lovely card which has disappeared. Here it is. It's my face now. You can see it. So I'll read it for you. It's called Great Dream, and this is this list of things which are echoing what Cheyanne and Lara have already said. And it goes this way. Of course, as a mnemonic, it ends up spelling great dream that help you remember what they are. But it's giving, relating, exercising, awareness, trying out, direction, have goals to look forward to, resilience, emotions, acceptance, and meaning. And those are all parts of things that are part of building a good personal life, but you can see so many of them are other directed. And that's, of course, part of the underlying principles for the Action for Happiness, because to join it, you sign a pledge, and the pledge is to create as much happiness as you can. And it's creating happiness, and it's not me focused, it's us focused. So it's for the world and for your surroundings.
Our next audience question is, are there resources I can access to learn more about happiness through various lenses? And this might be for Lara or John.
Sure. Well, John just offered a really great one. Action for Happiness is a website in a community that really offers some direction and clear advice on how to build your own personal happiness, but as John has emphasized, really outward focused as well. A few other resources that come to my mind. First and foremost, perhaps it's top of mind for me, is the World Happiness Report, which just came out 8 days ago. It's the new edition. It's freely available online. John and many others have worked extremely hard to collect some of the greatest and most relevant recent insights in well-being science, and it's got, the first chapter has a forward-looking approach for what the next 10 years might hold. Chapter 2 has national rankings and a whole bunch of valuable information. And then there are 3 invited chapters from experts in their area on social media, in fact, on generosity and altruism, and finally on government effectiveness. So there's a whole bunch, it's a wealth of information in that document you can find online. A couple other resources I often direct people to. One is through the University of Pennsylvania. There's a website organized by Marty Seligman, who's done a lot of research on happiness and positivity, positive psychology, called Authentic Happiness. It's got links to many different papers, but also a repository of a bunch of different happiness quizzes and assessments that you can take at home at your convenience, just freely accessible. So that could be a resource if anybody's looking for some validated measures of positivity or happiness. And also one other source that I have found really useful and that I think does a lot of great outreach is the Center for Greater Good at the University of California, Berkeley. It's run by Dacher Keltner, who's another researcher who does fantastic work in the area of positive psychology. And it's a well-funded institution that puts a lot of focus on collecting, summarizing, and distributing recent evidence-based information. And so they have a newsletter, like Action for Happiness. I think they also send out a monthly calendar with kind of daily prompts or reminders of things you could do to improve your own well-being or the well-being of others. And they do a lot of outreach, for instance, and seminars for teachers, for various companies and organizations and whatnot. So those are a few places that I often look or share when people ask for information.
Further to that, I'm not sure how much it's in the existing Thrive framework, but that's always been part of the potential and promise, is that the community that is those who are using the app in order to connect more specifically with their healthcare journey in various aspects itself, because the whole idea of Thrive Health rather than Repair Health is to build the conditions around in the community and in individuals that actually reduce the direct access to the curative parts of the healthcare system by making these investments in advance. Well, you could see how such a platform, one of the best things about it, is that it can have on it links of the sort you just heard about directly. So it isn't, and I've made this case a lot in handling the versions of the Thrive app that are used in universities, because universities and other institutions, they want someone to come in and help direct people to the curative aspects who are already in trouble. And of course, from the well-being side, we say, no, that's not right. The right kind of intervention is before there's any trouble. So in order to get that kind of intervention, you have to have a broad network of people who are connected with one another and with life in a way that they're perfectly open to hearing about the good things. So for students, for example, who are often facing lots of difficulties, especially in their first year and so on, if you look at the networks for wellness and in the universities at the moment, they're all about who to call if you're feeling suicidal, who to call if you're feeling depressed. No, that's not that particular whiteboard should be filled with references to what to do to connect with your community. I remember when the information part of the Thrive app that was used during COVID-19, to ask people, what kind of help would you like? It's surprising. I think the number 2 response from people was, what can we do to help others? Well, you need precisely in that network, you need to get that information out. So to the students, it's what are the clubs that I can join? What are the pro-social activities within the university that are open to me? And of course, it's helping other people, but we know more than that. It's not just helping other people, it's helping you connect in a positive way in this new and strange environment. And ditto for within the actual course structures to create cooperative groups of learning and so on. Well, there are all these networks are possible, but they're going to be more possible if in fact the basic well-being base that students have access to provides them equally good access to positive ways of connecting with each other and building happiness, and not just requiring them to be in trouble before they get any help or positive connections with other people.
Can I add to that as well? I also think it's worth mentioning that our intuition might not always be to reach out. I think there is value in offering these opportunities, but I think there's also a lot to be thought about and potentially gained from scaffolding it into the regular day-to-day. Despite the fact that we know that social connections are so important for well-being, we find that it's not evidence from my lab, but from other labs has found that even brief conversations with a barista can boost your mood. With complete strangers can boost your momentary mood. Social connections are such a critical part of our day-to-day well-being. But when people are asked if they want to talk to a stranger, they would rather run away from this opportunity than dive right in. I imagine the same is true for first-year students who are just entering a new environment that is, full of lots of possibilities, but also a lot of what might seem like scary new environments. And so perhaps building in these opportunities to offer study groups, to put people in study groups rather than have them, not force them in, but make that the default, where people are built into a community and offered a community as opposed to having to reach out to create this kind of community, I think is really important, because I think people's intuition is to lean back when we need them to lean in.
Thank you. Our next question from the audience, we'll throw it out to the round table of the panel. Can you talk a little bit about social media and the role it plays in someone's happiness, or alternatively, how social media can negatively affect someone's happiness?
Yeah, I think we went over a little bit of this before, but again, like learning how to use social media when it's used to connect with other people, to build those positive relations, when it's used effectively to improve your lifestyle. So like, for example, what we look at social media is often what we're going to see more, what we like. So like a lot of my social media is filled with like recipes and fitness stuff, which I really benefit from because I'm like, hey, I can use this in everyday life. So again, going back to that, being aware of what you're looking at on social media, the content you're consuming can be very helpful just in terms of seeing how it impacts your mood, impacts your day-to-day life. If you're looking at things that are going to be helpful to you, social media can be great. If you're looking at like ways to reach out and get that social support from others, if you're looking to find a community that's similar to you that may not live super close to you, social media can be a great way of building those connections. Alternatively, as mentioned before, social media can also be a little bit dangerous when we get consumed by it, when we get consumed in the this is what should be the norm. This is what should be fun. I know in COVID, when a lot of people were traveling, I would look at social media. I'm like, oh, that's sad. Like, I want to be traveling. My life doesn't seem as great as those from the people I follow. But again, being mindful of that is that people put very specific things on social media. It's not generally what normal day-to-day life looks like. And just kind of being aware of that so it doesn't impact your happiness in that negative way.
That negative aspect is something we had a chapter of on in the World Happiness Report that was focused almost exclusively at the negative effects, and especially as they work out and flow through the lives of adolescent and post-adolescent females. And that's where the bulk of the evidence was suggested. What COVID did is it allowed the social media to be converted from a general scourge to a general benefit by, in fact, permitting direct connections with people at a time, and then when it was simply not possible to maintain the face-to-face impacts. And people have now understood those possibilities and enabled them to become much more general. Specific examples often help, stories if you like. Mike Viking, who started the Happiness Research Institute in Copenhagen and has had a spearheading role in creating a number of ventures that are designed to, and of course, these ventures are typically implemented and spread through social media. He founded a group supported by the Psoriasis Society. These are people who are designed, and typically these societies are designed to get more resources for treatment for the people who have the condition. He was saying, no, it's much more than that. We want to enable better lives for everybody, including people who have psoriasis. So he created a world internet community called So Happy, PSO Happy, which is a link for people who have psoriasis. And of course, it's been wonderful, because it then makes these communities of people who often are socially ostracized because of their appearance. People draw back instinctively, and of course that doesn't stop them from each other, so they can share, in fact, the difficulties. But more importantly, from Mike's perspective and the world's perspective, it gives them more confidence and more good ideas, because how can we together not just make things better for each other, but for the rest of the world as a whole. And it's also true, because what you want is not somebody to feel guilty about you or badly for you. You want somebody to give you a chance to reach out and make lives better for each other. So these networks of people who face the common problems has generated solutions, and the mere connection with others, it allows you to open your hearts and actions to making their lives better. And that, as we know, is a secret to a better life for you as well.
Thanks, John. Our next question is about sleep. How much screen off time is ideal before going to sleep? I've been trying to be better at this, but I'm struggling to stick to a routine.
Turn it off at noon.
I generally do about 2 hours before I go to bed. Staring at a screen, that blue light suppresses our production of melatonin, which we need to get a good night's sleep. So general rule of thumb for me, and this varies. Some people say 30 minutes, some people say an hour. I like to just be safe and do 2 hours. But yeah, before I go to bed, I usually turn my phone off for 2 hours, and I don't look at any screens, not a TV or a laptop. I'll try to read or do something else that is still keeping my mind active, but it's not, again, looking at that blue light. For people who do tend to work later in the night, or who just have jobs where they have to be looking at their phone or screen right before bedtime, highly recommend blue light filter glasses. It will help filter out some of that blue light, which will help you get a better quality sleep.
Hey, we have one last question. What are examples of the potential for pro-social behaviors for people who are going through healthcare journeys?
I'm happy to field that one, but invite others to join in. I think some of the ways in which we can be pro-social through healthcare journeys, I was thinking about this because I saw it pop up in the chat. I think a lot of it has to do with kind of various forms of connection and care that we can offer to other people. So first and foremost, I think sometimes going through a medical experience can sometimes be very isolating and terrifying, especially when you lack social support. And so I imagine finding ways to connect with people, especially those who are kind of dealing with similar things or who might be your support systems, can be extremely valuable. So for instance, I think it might be one way to kind of give and receive pro-social behavior through this journey is to connect people with their caregivers, whether that be doctors, nurses, various support specialists. I think from a doctor or nurse or specialist perspective, having that kind of personal care and connection, reaching out and showing an empathic response is a demonstration of pro-social behavior, showing that you truly care about how someone's doing. They're not just another patient, another number, another incident, but they're a human on the other side. And I think that means a lot to someone who is going through what might be one of the hardest experiences of their life. In addition to those kinds of personal connections with doctors or healthcare staff and healthcare experts, it might be finding ways to connect with the broader community of people who are experiencing these difficult situations. So, for instance, if you've recently had a stroke, I suspect there are many other people who have recently been in a similar position. If you're trying to become a donor, if you are trying to if you're going through IVF, there are many people who might be dealing or trying to navigate similar situations. And so finding a community and being part of that community, being an active voice and a member, I think could be very supportive. But I also think that offers tags into my last thought, which is your personal experience and story can probably be very helpful for others. So I had kids a couple years ago, and I remember thinking how surprised I was that a lot of my experiences were somehow unexpected. I went through, one of the I took part in probably a 3-month birthing class and had made a lot of friends and connections, but still there was a bunch of unexpected and unknowns. And so I really enjoyed the connections that I made and sharing my experiences with other moms and other friends. And it felt like some of the challenging experiences that I had that felt blindsided by, I could help preempt those for other people. And so although that might not be what we often think of as a first round pro-social behavior, I think kind of sharing those experiences, preparing others, and offering that kind of interpersonal but also practical support can be really important. And so yeah, I think building connections with patients and healthcare providers, I think finding communities, and I think kind of participating in those communities and sharing our stories are all very important ways in which we can be pro-social through this healthcare journey. And I think that's a lot of what Thrive offers, to be honest. It offers a lot of opportunities for those connections and care. And I think those really matter.
Oh, John, you're muted.
I wanted to mute myself. I was inviting Cheyanne to go first, and then I'll follow.
Yeah, to just kind of go off what Lara said, building those communities and sharing your story is so helpful to not feeling alone in your situation, but also learning from the ideas and experiences of others. I do recommend to all my clients, like join a support group, whether that's joining a group on Facebook or meeting weekly at a community center, kind of finding those connections. And as mentioned before, as humans, we need to connect with other people. We need to bond with other people, and it can help us not feel alone. I remember I was diagnosed with ADHD in 2018, and I finally joined an ADHD support group during COVID, and I'm like, oh my gosh, other people experience this too. It's not just me. And it was really comforting and really helpful to learn what tips and tricks and tools other people use that I started implementing in my life that I found really helpful. So I'm a huge believer in get that community support and get those shared experiences.
The thing that occurs to me as most important is to realize the effectiveness of advice and support from somebody who's been there. And I talked to some fellow I was given a big public address on this, and I was being driven to the airport by a taxi driver who turned out to be a currently out of work healthcare provider in mental health. So he ran institutions or houses that looked after people who would come out of hospital care and were in this business of trying to do the next stages of their mental health recoveries. And I asked him quite a lot about it. And it turns out I told him the values we'd learned of bottom-up mutual aid as something to produce happiness and good results. And I said, how does that relate to your experience? He said, absolutely. He said, I've run many of these centers, and if they are, I'm in charge of running them, and their very best ones are the ones that are not run by professionals, or those who are initially professionals, but those who themselves have that same problem or have had that same problem, because they understand, they're empathetic, they can relate. And of course, and this was the other part of his story, that in fact, those who are dealing with their own difficulties by helping others, in fact, not only do the others they're helping get better faster, they themselves graduate from being dependent to being caregivers and cure givers. And that's an enormously empowering thing, and especially in mental health issues. A feeling of lack of efficacy, lack of purpose, lack of connections, and lack of joy, all of those things are provided by the capacity to link and contribute to others. So for me, the most important part of the Thrive platform as it's developed will be, in fact, to give people the possibilities, not to connect just so other people can help them and that you can learn their lessons. That's important. But it seems to me the more fundamental part is to connect them for good, enabling them to help others. And A, they want to, and B, it's the most effective form of treatment. So C, why don't we do it?
Well, thank you for all those great questions from our audience. As we conclude this webinar, I want to thank all the speakers for their insight and participation on a topic that really affects all of us in some form, happiness. You can support your team's mindfulness and enable their healthy, happy hormones to be activated this year through Circle. To learn more about Circle, check out the website on the screen. Thank you once again for everyone's participation and time. Take care.